Debate night is back. Tonight, we've come to Inverness, one of Britain's fastest growing cities. A quarter of the people in the Highlands now live in or around here. That brings opportunities, but also challenges as well. Tonight, local people have joined us in Scotland's largest arts centre, the Eden Court, to talk about the big issues of the day. What matters most to them? Let's find out. Welcome to a brand new series of Debate Night. Debate Night is the show where the people of Scotland get to ask the big questions, answering them on our panel this evening. From Scottish Labour, making his debut on the show, the MP for Nahelin and Anir, and as formerly the Western Isles, of course, Torcuil Crichton. Torcuil was elected at the general election last year. Before politics, he spent almost 40 years working in newspapers, starting on the West Highland Free Press, ending as Westminster editor of the Daily Record. Also with us this evening, Alan Savage, owner of the energy recruitment business Orion Group. One of Scotland's most accomplished businessmen, according to the Observer newspaper. His bid to save Inverness Thistle and take it out of administration has been accepted. He hopes this will be the start of a new dawn for the troubled Highland Football Club. Lesley Riddoch is an award-winning journalist and podcaster. She's co-founder of think tank Nordic Horizons, which explores what Scotland can learn from our Nordic neighbours. Lesley hosts a weekly podcast and has a column in the national newspaper as well. Edward Mountain is the Scottish Conservative MSP for the Highlands and Islands. He's the party spokesperson for veterans and convener of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee at Holyrood. Edward is one of those MSPs planning to step down at next year's election. And finally, the SNP MSP for Inverness and Nairn, Fergus Ewing. Fergus has represented this area for 26 years and is one of the original members of the Scottish Parliament. He was a Scottish Government Minister for 14 years under Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, but has said he will not stand for the SNP at the next election. However, he may run as an independent candidate. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our studio audience here in Inverness. It's great to be back in the capital of the Highlands. You can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland tonight. BBCDN is the hashtag you need on social media. And our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Debbie Sutherland. Debbie, evening.
Hi. Following on from the Supreme Court's ruling on the interpretation of woman, how do the panel believe our public institutions should now move forward?
Thank you, Debbie. This is a very contentious subject. We do not have the Scottish Greens or the Liberal Democrats with us tonight, although they will be with us later in this run of Debate Night. And Fergus Ewing, you have taken a different position on this from the Scottish Government. How do we move forward from here, though, following last week's Supreme Court ruling?
Well, to answer the question directly, I do think that the ruling is correct. I don't think it was necessary to have gone to the Supreme Court to work out that there are, in fact, two sexes, male and female. Y chromosomes are inscribed in every cell in my body, and no drugs that I can take or operation that I can undergo can ever change that. We should treat everybody with courtesy and respect. We should treat people as we wish to be treated ourselves. But where do our public institutions go? Well, they have been in breach, particularly the health service, of the existing law in the form of the Workplace Health Safety and Regulations, 1992, paragraph 24, for those of you who wish to look it up afterwards. And that very clearly says already, the existing law for 3 decades, that where for reasons of propriety it is required, that, for example, doctors and nurses who are working in an operating theatre can they come into work and change into their scrubs and change back into their day clothes at the end of the day? For reasons of propriety, separate changing facilities must be provided. Not one health board in Scotland has that as a policy. That was wrong before the ruling, but it's crystal clear that it's wrong now. So my view, what should be done is the Scottish Government should issue an order, and they've got order powers under the National Health Scotland Act, I think it was 1948, to order every health board to comply with the law so that women can have the dignity of their own safe spaces. Many women have fought for women's rights for centuries, and it was very sad to see that so-called transgender activists besmirched the statue to commemorate Millicent Fawcett, who fought for women's votes, along with Jan Smutt, who fought against imperialism, and Nelson Mandela, for goodness sake, the greatest campaigner against apartheid the world's ever seen. It's really pretty ironic, in a sad way, that that's what it's come to. But in Scotland, let's treat everybody with dignity and respect, but for goodness sake, let's give women the safe spaces that they thought was their right until the last few years.
Okay. Lesley, Riddoch, where do we go from here? How do we move on?
Well, I am a feminist. I have been all my life. I've been involved in production of various scurrilous magazines like Harpies and Quines. I seem to remember you were a subscriber, Fergus. That's a wee joke, by the way. And so, yes, there was a balance that had gone, I think, too much the wrong way. So there's 0.45% of the population, apparently, are trans, but there's quite a lot of incursions into everybody else's behaviour that were required or asked for. There was nonsense situations like Isla Bryson, a convicted rapist being put into a women's jail. Wrong. There were academics who were fired for just explaining their view that women were biological women. Wrong to be fired.
Absolutely.
However, what are we trying to do with trans people now? And I just ask, where are they supposed to go? Because I quite see the arguments about women's changing rooms to the vexed toilet issue and so on, but we've now got the crazy situation that someone who has begun life, let's say, as a biological man and has transitioned to being a trans woman, is meant to be in a men's toilet looking like a woman, and exactly the opposite is true, where we will end up with trans women being in women's toilets. Now, I don't know where those folk feel that they are at home, where they're meant to go, and it strikes me that a solution for the future is already being adopted, actually. I came up on the train. Many of the train stations have single cubicles. You have unisex toilets in lots of schools already. The BBC has it in Pacific Quay, actually.
This venue tonight, actually,
right,
as well.
everywhere has begun to move to stopping having this, if you like, the binary divide. And I appreciate that people feel safer with no ambiguity in life. And it doesn't bother me so much that there are people who feel they're in the wrong body. If it impacts on other people negatively, then there has to be some clear judgment made. It's just been made. But I want us to think, for those people, especially with the younger age group, a lot of the younger people I know are outraged about this. I'm only conveying that view. Perhaps the people here are not. But I think the next age group are more comfortable with fluidity, don't get bothered so much about how people portray themselves or want to behave, and feel that all the kind of, the big cases that have made the headlines have basically skewed the debate considerably. So I have a lot more time for trans people. I just want the balance to be corrected so that most facilities are dealing with how the vast majority of people see themselves.
We have young people, older people in the audience tonight, people I'm sure with many views, different views on this subject. Gentleman in the green top here.
So I have a lot of concerns around this ruling, but one of them, and a lot of colleagues that I work with who are quite masculine-looking females biologically, and they're worried that this ruling will shut them out of women's spaces because they look masculine. How did the panel solve that? Okay, let me just get a few more views. We will pick that up. Gentleman on the end over here. Yes.
It's just a total lack of understanding of discrimination. I went into an industry that was female-dominated over 30 years, and I got kicked out of the male changing room because I wasn't a doctor, I was a nurse. So, to me, nothing has changed in the world. It's male and female, but I start off as a female, I change into a male, I decided I'm male, I stay male. But for some people, like the lady said, some people are born in the wrong body. And I think if we don't get a balanced understanding of discrimination, what's next?
Thank you. I'll take some more views from you in just a second. Torcuil Crichton, Labour has flip-flopped on this issue. Have you changed your view?
I haven't changed my view, and in answer to the original question, what we should do, we should apply the law and the Equality Act. But we should also take the heat out of this cultural divide. When I went home first in 23 to start campaigning, I thought the big issue was going to be, of course, it was going to be ferries, but it wasn't. In the supermarkets, people came up to me and said, "What is this?" People were bewildered. What is this gender reform, you know? And then they became quite angry and animated about it, and it became a lightning rod for discontent on one side or the other.
Scottish Labour signed up to it.
Yeah. Well, Scottish Labour asked for the Equality Act to be respected as it went through the Scottish Parliament, and that didn't happen. The debate got so heated and divided that I actually sought out a family whose child, a member of the family, had transitioned. I didn't get to speak to them. I spoke to their mother. And her concerns were the same as anyone else would be. She was worried her child would be discriminated against at work, would be discriminated against in housing. And I always brought to the debate, and I still bring tonight, the fact we have to remember we're dealing with a small number of probably very vulnerable people on the margins of society who have to be respected. But at the same time, we can't build the rights for that small minority by trampling on the rights of women whose space have to be respected.
And that's what was happening?
Yes, that's what's happening. All my women friends told me that's what was happening, and I do listen to them.
OK. Let me go up to the back row, up there. Yes, on you go.
So this is kind of my opinion as a young person still in secondary school. It's kind of like it should be a person's choice. It shouldn't be up to the Supreme Court. It shouldn't be up to a government to decide what somebody does with their life or how they live their life. It should be up to the person, as everybody's life. They're all humans. We're no different. Nobody's different. We're all the same.
Let me just shuffle along that row that you're on. Lady with a pink jacket on. Yes, on you go.
Thank you. Should it not just be that everybody has a right to be themselves and that we should all just respect everybody without discrimination?
And gentleman just in front of you with the beard. Yeah, on you go.
Yeah, so I've just read recently about the suicide rates in transgender people and how high they are, and that's concerning. So whilst we understand the ruling and why that was made for process and policy, perhaps what we need to concentrate on is supporting transgender people in the best way possible. So things like suicide, because they're taking their lives because of the challenges that they face in their own lives. They need more support, but we need to balance that with not making their rights impacting upon the rest of the people.
Thank you. Edward Mountain, the Scottish Parliament got the ball rolling on this whole thing. What role have politicians at Holyrood now got in terms of reconciliation, healing and moving things forward as well?
Well, first of all, it's probably not a good thing to be agreeing with opposition politicians, but when I agree with them and they're right, Fergus and Torcuil, you're absolutely spot on. We've got ourselves into the most difficult situation which we didn't need to be in. And I've got letters from people who are writing into me and saying, what happens when I go to a hospital as a woman and I ask to be seen by a woman, but I might be being seen by a man? Because NHS Highland have said clearly in their policy that if somebody says they're a woman, then they'll be taken at face value for a woman, and it might be then a woman is being seen by a man. And I've got a situation where a constituent has complained that they are having to, go, as a woman, go in their changed already for work because they're not prepared to go in and share a changing room where males could be present. So we've got ourselves into a really difficult situation. I do think, though, Lesley's right, that we need to get ourselves out of this situation, and we need to provide the facilities for trans people within the hospitals and public institutions that they require.
And it's up to politicians to get us out of it, to give the guidance.
I think politicians, you know, let's be clear. The Scottish Parliament drove this forward, and every party apart from the Conservatives, in fact, 3 members of the Conservatives supported gender recognition, gender reform. The rest of us didn't. We were the only party that didn't. The Parliament has got ourselves into this. The government has got these institutions into the position where we need to resolve it, and therefore the government must see a way out. And we can't just absolve the institutions. We've got to help them find a way out rather than just leave them in the lurch, which we could possibly be doing. And the government said they're not going to push the gender reform bill any further, but what they've got to do is find the facilities for people so that they can, if they're trans, they feel comfortable in a workplace.
Okay,
I believe that strongly.
All right, we have this ruling now. Alan Savage, how do we move on from it? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I agree with that people have the right to be what they want to be. And inevitably, money's going to have to be spent to set up a committee to set some targets of how they want to move the processes forward and then monitor the progress and sort people and departments and businesses out that are not coming to address the issue, which is real and can cause difficulties, like the gentleman said about suicide. So it's a real issue. People have to be respected. The money has to be spent and targets have to be set.
Let's go back to Debbie, who asked the question originally on this, how we should move forward from here. Debbie, what do you think about what you've heard?
Well, I would say it's not transphobic for women to uphold their rights and to set boundaries. I think it's a man problem, it's not a woman problem. And that I would be a bit disappointed, I think, if public bodies weren't moving forward at a pace now, even before the EHRC guidance comes out in summer, and that we're already reviewing. And I think it is really imperative that the Scottish Government is now driving forward the changes.
Your views on this subject on the social media this evening. Hashtag is BBCDN to get in touch with us. Tonight we're in Inverness. Next week we're going to be in Glasgow for the show. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for that show, or Perth the week after, go to bbc.co.uk/debate night. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from David Pocock. David, evening.
Good evening. Inverness's only vascular surgeon has recently resigned, citing the unacceptable standard of care at Raigmore Hospital. Some patients were already travelling 100 miles across the Highlands to get treatment. Now they face another journey of a further 100 miles to Glasgow, Aberdeen or Edinburgh. Is our NHS safe in the SNP's hands?
Thank you, David. Last month, Health Secretary Neil Gray unveiled a new operational improvement plan for the NHS designed to reduce waiting times, improve performance. We're now spending about a third of the Scottish Government's budget, £21 billion, on the NHS in Scotland every year. Lesley, Riddoch, is it safe in the SNP's hands?
Well, clearly not. I mean, I wish... What's the name of that vascular surgeon?
Bernard Wolfe.
Right. And is very highly rated and basically resigned, as far as I can see, because he said the care wasn't safe enough. And he wasn't resigning because he wanted to retire, because he wanted to leave. It was a very principled stand that he took there to draw attention. It's the reason we're talking about this tonight. It's clearly been for a long time. I mean, my mother came from Wick, so, OK, I'm a bit biased on this. The Caithness Maternity Hospital, nonsense, really, has been an ongoing problem for a very long time, that a whole county of people, of women, end up having to come a week early, maybe several weeks early, in case there's any problem, to Inverness to be able to give birth. And that has all sorts of leaden implications for a population. So this has essentially been going on for quite a long time, I would have to say, under various different administrations in Scotland for a very long time. It's as if there's an acceptance, generally speaking, that if you want to live outside a city, you're going to struggle and you just have to live with that. Now, I appreciate what's happening in Inverness. That is it's Raigmore that he's resigned from, so everybody's going to suffer. But, I mean, really, the degree to which the Scottish Human Rights Commission said that there is a human rights crisis in the Highlands in housing, health and food supplies. Well, here we are with health. We'll probably end up talking about housing at some point. The whole thing has not been good enough for a very long time, and some of the problems, I know there's bigger ones, but in the remote areas, it can often be there's no housing available. If you go to, I very often go to Hammerfest, the world's northernmost town in Norway. If you go to site there as a doctor or a surgeon, if you go to work in their hospital in the northernmost town, you get your student loans written off, you get lower tax rates, you get help with housing, and you get very tangible support to attract you to go there. I think it's time we started talking about a package like that.
I know we've got nurses in the audience, midwives and doctors. I'd love to hear from you this evening on this lady with the glasses and the blue top. Yeah.
So is an 8% pay rise over 2 years acceptable to try and recruit staff up here?
You think that's a key part of this?
I think it is, yeah, because we're a remote area, there's not enough resources and we can't keep the staff, so everyone's overwhelmed.
Edward Mountain, you raised the case of this surgeon at Holyrood. There is a locum, I think, covering his work up here at the moment. NHS Highland have said you need about 800,000 people to have a vascular centre of excellence. The population is not here for it, so how do you square that circle?
Right, let's just start with Bernard Wolfe, because Lesley's entirely right. He resigned after bringing the problems to NHS Highland on the basis that the service that he was being asked to provide wasn't safe. Now, what has resulted in people going down to Edinburgh or Glasgow or to Aberdeen to have their treatment. And I'm dealing with a situation where somebody went to Edinburgh, came back, the operation had failed, and they died because they couldn't get the vascular operation they needed in Inverness. It is heartbreaking. But it's not just people like that. It's people who have heart attacks. It's people who are having amputations and requiring prosthetics. All of these people require vascular surgeons. Now, NHS Highland is wrong in the way they're dealing with this. What they're saying is we don't have the population, therefore we will allow the service to be taken to areas where the population is big enough, hence why it's going to Aberdeen and Edinburgh. What we should be saying in the Highlands is we might not have the concentration of people here, but why should the Highlanders go down to the Central Belt to get their treatment? Why shouldn't people from the Central Belt come up to the Highlands to get their treatment? They do when it comes to the National Treatment Centre, where they're getting their orthopaedics done. And I just think that we've allowed, in the 10 years which I've been in this Parliament, we've allowed NHS Highland to allow all our services to drift away, whether it's maternity from Caithness, whether it's vascular surgeons. Don't forget, in Highlands, we have more vascular surgery operating theatres than any other health board, and we have more vascular surgery beds than any other health board, except we're allowing them to be closed down and be taken elsewhere. And we should be standing up as a population in the Highlanders saying, enough is enough. We want services kept up here, and if people from the Central Belt need treatment, we'll treat them, and we're prepared to welcome them up here. But it shouldn't always be us that has to travel elsewhere. Right, lots of hands up in the audience. On you go.
As well as the population issue, if we take Lesley's example of WIC maternity services, you need 3 full-time consultants to provide a 24-hour service. The number of births and patients are simply not there, so that doctors doing that work or are not attracted to work there because they become completely de-skilled, and that's a huge problem. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a sort of a medical education, medical training, and all the rest of it side of this as well that has to come into the equation. But I like Edward's view about trying to bring more of these subspecialties to Inverness and have people come here. That would be, quite a big change of thinking.
Yeah, I'd love to know what you hear. I think at home about this. Hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We'll go to those ladies in the middle in just a second, but lady in the glasses right up at the top. On you go.
Over the last number of years, the support and resources for children with additional support needs and their families has been massively reduced. I have heard from several members of the local area who are seriously struggling. Jobs have been removed in local schools that are vital for supporting children. If NHS Highland cannot support the youngest and most vulnerable of our society, where does that leave us?
OK, thank you. Let's go to these 2 ladies in the middle. Lady in the black and white top first. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I live rurally just outside Inverness, and somebody in our local area had to go to Aberdeen to have vascular checks done. And while they're taken by ambulance and then finished, there was no ambulance to take them home. So NHS provided a taxi. How is that economically viable? Exactly. So if you think that's one person, think of the number of people that's happening to. Therefore, it's economic madness to be spending money like that when actually the resources could be put into retaining.
Thank you. And lady next to you as well.
Yeah, next week I've actually got a major vascular operation in Dundee.
Oh, goodness.
But I would say, like,
Was that due to take place at Rigmore, but it's now going elsewhere?
They always said that I would have to go because of this issue, I think.
Okay.
But I would just say that the communication between the health boards is messy at best. And I also think it's kind of unfair on the surgeon that is helping me. He's very lovely. But it's very hard for him. I mean, he seems to be working all the time, that man, so I just think he's all over the place. He's here on Saturdays. I've seen him every Saturday. So I don't think it's really fair on them either, to be honest.
Well, first things first, best wishes for your procedure next week. Fergus Ewing, is the NHS safe in SNP hands?
When people get access to the treatment they need, by and large, I hear very little but praise for the treatment they get from doctors, nurses, clinicians. It's the waiting. And every day, my constituency office receives fairly heartbreaking cases of people waiting for operations for various ailments. I do think this is an example where if the main parties work together, Stephen, in Scotland, we can find the solutions. I think there's a clear will, firstly, to reform the NHS. Do we really need 14 regional health boards in such a small country? But perhaps more important than that, and that would save some money, incidentally, to mention the lady's point about the pay rise deal for nurses, and it won't make me popular with my ex-ministerial colleagues, but I think ministers in the Scottish Government granting themselves a £20,000 pay rise was absurd, and I wondered if it was April the 1st, but apparently it wasn't, and that happened. But one very serious point I wanted to make was this, that a centralised model is being imposed on NHS Highland because of the GP contract. And that means that services like vaccination, which used to be provided by GPs all around the Highlands, a local service, the GP would know whether or not you'd had the vaccination. It was by order moved to the centralised control of the NHS Highland. And guess what? The IT system they have can actually communicate to GPs who has and who has not been vaccinated. Now, why that was ever allowed to happen, I don't know. And I have to say that there has been a tragic loss of life of an infant because that infant didn't get a whooping cough vaccination. And no doubt an FAI will look at the issues I'm raising today. But I raised that before the service was ordered to be moved away from GPs. And the civil service and the ministers in Edinburgh, I think it was Mr. Youssef was the health minister at the time, listened to us very politely and said that they would take on board what we said and did precisely nothing. So I think services must be provided more at a local level. And the last thing I would say, Stephen, is this. The GPs tell me, GPs working with me, and there's 5, I've worked with them for 3-4 years on this now, they tell me that a large number of the inpatients in Rigmore who spend an average of about 40 days are over, shall we say, 65, 70, and shouldn't be there at all. They shouldn't be there at all. And many of them because they haven't had the vaccinations against influenza, and they end up getting respiratory or other diseases, which keep them in hospital all that time, and that's blocking the beds that other people need to get their treatment. And so, no surprise, we have to send people to Dundee in Aberdeen. The gentleman in the front is absolutely right. We can't have every specialty in Inverness. We recognise that. But surely we should have a vascular service in Inverness, the fastest growing city in Europe.
Let's hear more from the audience. Lady in the pink jacket.
I think generally it's the exorbitant cost and wastefulness that causes a lot of the issues within the NHS, especially NHS Highland. My fiance would weekly go to his nurse for a fingerprint blood test. He now has to go to a hospital and he has to get blood taken. It gets sent to another hospital. It gets checked. He gets a phone call. It's so wasteful. It's insane. I think you need to have single parents living on a budget who can actually work the budget for the country. So it's not wasteful anymore. It's too much.
Alan Savage. As a businessman, is the SNP NHS in Scotland wasteful, do you think? Is it safe in their hands?
Well, if you look at the overall spend of 21 billion, where does it actually get spent? Does it get spent on doctors and nurses who do the job, or does it get spent on management? And I think the privatisation of the health service was a disaster, along with privatisation of the water industry and other industries. So the money's going to the wrong place. Brexit was a disaster because we can't attract workers who will do these jobs. And the whole thing needs looking at from top to bottom.
What would you do with it?
Well, I'd certainly do a review, and I would get back to the health service being run for the benefits of the people in the country and not for big companies to make massive profits whilst the patients aren't getting the care they want and vascular surgeons can't work in Inverness. I think the money spent profile is ridiculous, and the politicians talk about, you know, who's right, who's wrong politically, but you know, it's a fundamental problem. Money's been spent in the wrong areas, and the whole years under the Conservative government since Thatcher have been a disaster. I mean, you know, Margaret Thatcher stopped free school milk. What was the cost of free school milk to society over the last 30, 40 years, whenever she did it, in protecting children, give them good health, and then putting less stress on the hospitals and finances. So people make political decisions like stopping free school milk. The cost must be absolutely ginormous to the National Health Service. So politicians want to get elected every 3 to 5 years and make short-term decisions.
But can the NHS do everything, given ageing population, more complex health needs that go with that?
Well, they can spend the budget in the right places on doctors and nurses, not committees discussing where they're going to get the next batch of, you know, who's going to get the order for the next drug, and you know, where they're being taken to what race course and football matches, and the whole thing's corrupt.
I understand, Edward. Torcuil, I want to bring you into this, because you had direct experience as a child. I think you were airlifted, weren't you, to hospital when you were
when I was 12, yeah. I fell downstairs and cracked my skull and was airlifted to the Southern General, where Sam Galbraith, the late Sam Galbraith, was my surgeon. So I knew Sam long before he was a politician. But my brother must have been jealous, because about 5 years later, he fell off a cliff and was airlifted to the same hospital where he underwent surgery as well, but he's fine as well. But the question, to get back to the question, which was, is the NHS safe in the SNP's hands? The truth is the NHS is broken in the SNP's hands. We all know the statistics: 1 in 6 people on waiting lists, 100,000 people a year waiting to get into hospital.
But there is this plan from Neil Gray to solve this.
I think that's the 5th plan the SNP have had to resolve things in as many years, perhaps, and they're just going nowhere because they don't have an idea. And I know it's not a competition, but and 100 miles is a long way to go to hospital. But in the Western Isles, you know, people have to get on a ferry, to catch a bus, to catch a plane, to get a second plane, to come here for their chemotherapy. It's distressing and long way. I took Jackie Bailey, Labour's Scottish Deputy Leader and Health Spokesperson, to Barra last week, and to you as well, to hear directly from people what their experiences are of patient transport, which is a huge issue. And she said about, and she will set about, laying out how to resolve that. Yes, cutting back on management, cutting back on health boards. Yes, increasing the power of primary care providers, so decisions are taken for patients where they live, and enabling people to make their own decisions so they can decide where to get treatment as well. But the NHS needs a new direction. It needs new people in charge, and the SNP simply, you know, 5 plans later, don't have any idea, and they don't seem to care about patients on the periphery either.
OK, let me hear from people in the audience with real experience of this. Man in the back row.
I just suffering from stage 3 cancer at the moment, and I've been very fortunate to get 14 months in chemotherapy. And I would urge the politicians, they said in the very beginning of this show we could work together. A secret someone told me many years ago is stop, look, assess and manage. Everybody's looking for brownie points. Get your acts together, get the team together, get rid of management in the NHS and support the doctors and nurses. And in fact, all our emergency services who do a fantastic job, motivate them. That's what you need to do.
Thank you. We wish you well with your treatment as well. Your views on everything you hear on the show. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We've got a lot to get through this evening, so let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Chris Marden. Chris, evening.
My question is, what can be done to stop the equivalent of a modern Highland clearances and keep people up here rather than the majority moving away?
Right, so we are in Inverness, fastest growing city in the UK at the moment, but outside Inverness, Highland Council forecast population across the Highlands is going to fall by 5% by 2040. They're talking about a drift away, especially of young people. Torcuil Crichton, you're one of the people that left, but then came back. What do we do about this modern Highland clearances?
I'm reluctant to compare it to the clearances, which were a dramatic and forced experience, but depopulation is the biggest issue facing us, certainly facing the periphery, facing the Western Isles. It exhibits itself in different ways. Professional women with young children say they can't get childcare. They can't get childcare because there's a donut-shaped hole in the population where the working age population should be. You can see it in fishing, in fish processing. You can go into a fish processing plant, which is a £4 million scallops to Singapore in 24 hours business, and you go through the door and it's staffed entirely by Ukrainian refugees. We can't get the economy running unless there's a war on the other side of Europe. That's wrong. So we have to start looking at population retention, attracting young people back to the Highlands with jobs, with housing. We have the wrong kind of housing. We need housing for young people, and we need transport links to hit on the subject of roads and ferries again. And we need just to make the place more attractive for the people we have to live and work there. And we also have to think about, Brexit was mentioned, we have to think about attracting people in as well and making the place inclusive and attractive for everyone else. But it is the biggest single issue facing us on the edge. And people don't think that's important, but it is, because what's happening on the edge of Europe right now, in places like the Western Isles, is going to be lunch for the rest of Europe. White Western Europe is in decline. We're all aging. The demographics are moving the wrong way, and we have to have a really honest debate about this and about how we solve it.
Lesley, same challenges in the Nordic countries. You're on a kind of mini tour of the Highlands at the moment, talking about what we can learn from the Nordic experience. How do they do things differently?
I'll tell you, honestly, I'm sitting here fuming because what the Highlands have got is energy. Massive, massive amounts of renewable energy. The profits of which are going everywhere else but the Highlands. The Highlands should have no energy bills. They've got so much potential. All the remote areas could be laughing and choosing between, will it be tidal? Would it be solar even? Would it be wind? Would it be hydro? There's so much potential here, but because of the pricing of energy in the United Kingdom, which is a Westminster responsibility, we end up having renewables priced at the expensive rate of gas. We also have rubbish grid connections. I was in Applecross last weekend. Those guys had a community hydro. I knew the last that actually spent 2 months raising £780,000. Unbelievable that she could do that in 2 months flat. They were really pleased with our community hydro. We snag. The grid is so rubbish, they can only export half of the energy, and it's a tiny, tiny hydro system. Same's true for any commercial venture. They can't export the energy. How do you think Applecross is going to expand its population? And how angry would you be there? I wish people would be more angry. My lot come from Caithness, a bit of East Highland. I understand people are quiet. It's time to get really angry about this because you are being had.
Let's hear from the audience. Man in the black. At the very back, yes.
Yeah, and just going on from the previous subject as well, regarding health, everything seems to be just move the population of the Highlands to cities because it's too expensive to run the Highlands. So depopulise it by running down the hospitals, the schools, the services and everything else to make sure that people do leave. There's your depopulation right away. There's nothing to encourage people to go in to the Highlands, to come up here to live. And as Lesley said earlier, if you go to the very north of Norway, you get incentives to actually move there. You get all the benefits of it. Here, you get penalised. You absolutely get slaughtered
and
if you want to move to the
can't buy
Highlands.
any land because the land is owned by 432 people, half the private land of Scotland, which is a smaller number of people than in 1872. And the bulk of that problem is sitting here. And we haven't had proper land reform yet from any government, SNP, Labour, anybody. It's still sitting as a fiefdom. We're sitting in a feudal country, and we shouldn't be. Land should be so cheap, and energy should be so powerful, and local incomes could be so high because they are in Iceland, Norway, Finland, everywhere else at this latitude. Folk are laughing with half a fraction of the energy we've got. Come on, let's just change all this.
All right, let's put that to the test. Just hang on a second, Tor. Well, man in the black shirt there, yes. On you go.
Yeah, speaking as somebody who's lived in Inverness his whole life, 27 years, I can absolutely say that there is nothing appealing to Inverness whatsoever for young people. I am a doorman, or was a doorman for 8 years, and it absolutely broke my heart seeing families that have spent a lot of money coming to enjoy the Highlands with little children, and there's absolutely nothing to do for them. They have to sit in their hotel rooms at night because all the entertainment is for pubs and alcohol. And speaking for personally myself, I'm actually thinking about moving down to Glasgow because I don't see any prospects in Inverness whatsoever.
Okay, you're a living example of this for us this evening. Alan Savage, you built a successful business here in the Highlands. How do we stop men like that leaving?
Well, I think he's Lord Gove now, isn't he? He just got made a Lord. He was in charge of levelling up, but I didn't see any levelling up money come up here. So you need to spend money on things inevitably, and the far north gets nothing compared. No Julian A96, no Julian A9. And we mentioned about renewables. The Sea Green project in Firth of Forth got built in China. So we in Scotland could have built all those products, the platforms, everything to do with it could have been built in Scotland, and yet we let it go to China. So you look at the green issue, you've got to bring it back from China's. Obviously, got its own green problems, so they don't sort of recognise it. And then you're going to ship these things back across the world on boats, causing carbon. And I think you've got to get a grip of things at the right level and start building things in Scotland again, not just wind farms and the products, but everything. Let's look what we can build in Scotland and not have to go outside of Scotland to do it. So it's got to be thought through, and money spent and initiatives taken to make it attractive for businesses to be here and not farm things out to China.
You want to build a new stadium, don't you? You want to build a new stadium in Inverness.
Well, I don't want to personally build it. But
that's a big job. Fergus Ewing, how do we keep people in the Highlands?
I mean, there's probably about 50 answers to this, all of which would play a part. There's no one single solution, but let me just suggest a few. At the risk of antagonising those who have other ideas that I don't mention. I mean, when I was rural minister, we reached the 1,000 crofting grant. That's 1,000 families that were given a modest grant to have a home, often in the Western Isles.
Yeah, yet first-time applicants are routinely turned down.
Well,
and the grant is 38,000 when the cost of building a house is $250,000.
Well, when I was there, around
triple the grant.
Well, let me get started, Torcuil. You've had your shot. Around about 80% of those were granted. The only ones that weren't were those who earned really quite large incomes. So that was that. But that's one example. Another one, and this is where I think there's tremendous opportunity for the Scottish and UK governments to work together. And it's taking Lesley's point. I mean, when I was Energy Minister, rather than just the community benefit from wind farms, which is payable normally at £5,000 per megawatt, which is okay, but it's a check. Community ownership, where communities had a stake in owning the wind farm, was vastly superior. And the way we did it was to say to the developer, look, well, why don't you put another couple of turbines onto your case? The Scottish Government, through a fund called the Renewable Energy Infrastructure Fund, put in money to enable a 10% loan to be granted to communities, and the other 90% would be funded by banks, Close Brothers, Triodos, and the Co-op and others. The Scottish banks shamefully didn't take part, but it was a commercial proposition, Stephen, because the income from the wind farm repaid the loan. Now all these communities, and there's many of them in the Western Isles, that have a community ownership share, have a huge benefit that they can use to help young people. Hang on a second, I haven't come to the clincher yet. How do the Scottish and UK governments work together? Well, the Scottish government has got the Scottish National Investment Bank. The UK government is setting up GB Energy, an institution which, as far as I know, has got no declared explicit purpose at the current time. And why don't they create a fund to help every community in Scotland have a share, whether it's in wind farms or the pump storage operations that are taking place, or the tidal energy.
All right, Torcuil Crichton, what do you think about that?
Good news is that GB Energy will give £1 billion to community energy schemes, and they are the key. And to tie back and to get some cross-party consensus, land reform, community ownership, and you mentioned the Western Isles, where there is more community-owned wind farming than anywhere else in Britain, is the template for how to go ahead. And community wind farms and community energy projects should get priority for grid connections. They shouldn't have to wait in the queue behind multinational projects. And yes, £5,000 per megawatt, so what, you know? That's community benefit. When people hear community benefit, they think, five-a-side football strips. We need community share. We need what we're doing in the Western Isles, where there's 2 big wind farms, internationally owned by foreign governments, in fact. The Western Isles Council and the community landlord are negotiating for a 20% share in each one of these. That would give the Western Isles Council 80 megawatts. The entire demand of the Western Isles in one day is 39 megawatts. Okay. So solving energy bills is the least we should be doing with energy.
How do you even get a subsea connector fast to any of the islands? We've sat for 30 years waiting for Westminster to approve subsea connectors to get Orkney, Shetland, the Western Isles, the windiest blasted places in Europe, feeding into the grid.
That's because we had no proper industrial strategy for 2 decades.
That's not why
that's why things were being built in China instead of being built here.
Okay, I want to bring us back to the question here. Edward Mountain, this is about people leaving the Highlands. How do we stop that?
Well, I think all the panellists have got fair points, you know, but we're not providing accommodation for people. We're not providing housing. We're not providing the infrastructure that they need. Now, Fergus, when he was in the Cabinet, promised us all broadband by 2021. Otherwise, he'd find another job. I'm still waiting for broadband to be delivered, as are a lot of people across the island.
I was forced to find another job.
Well, maybe there's a story there, Mr. Ewing. But, you know, there are things like the gentleman's mentioned up there about healthcare being centralised into the middle, like declining school rolls that we're seeing, which means that schools, you've only got to look at Charleston Academy in Inverness. It is a disgrace. Would I send my child to Charleston Academy where they can't even open the windows in the science block? It's so cold in the winter that they can't get there. It's so hot in the summer that they can't get there. And the school is basically falling down. We have lagged behind in the Highlands and we are seeing depopulation. So I would like to see us all working together. When Fergus and I worked together on the Grantham medical practice, we got that built. Cross-party. Fergus, myself and Rhoda took on the government and we did it. And I'd like to see more things being done like that.
All right.
Can I just talk about wind farms very briefly?
Very briefly.
Very briefly on wind farms. The benefits for wind farms across the Highlands cannot just be to the local communities where they're built, because all of the Highlands are suffering from the infrastructure that's going to have to go in. And we've got to share that wealth across all of the Highlands.
All right,
because painting another village hall from a community benefit fund is not
you made that point. Okay, your views on all of that. The hashtag is BBCDN. There's one other question that people were desperate to talk about here this evening, and it comes from Aaron Preacher. Aaron, evening.
Evening. Realistically, can you see the A9 being dualled by its date of 2035?
What do you think, Aaron?
To be honest, I don't think it is possible, considering they've only done 6 miles in 3 years.
Yeah, 2 sections, totalling 11 miles, have been upgraded so far. 77 miles to go. The 3rd section we drove through on the way up here tonight is now underway. Alan Savage, do you think it will ever be dualled, certainly by this date of 2035 as the target?
Definitely not. Yeah, I think it's about getting money from central government, and the SNP have failed to do that. So it's like boils down to money.
What do you think's gone wrong with this? You've lived up here all this time. You travel up and down that road.
Well, the SNP, when they got in, said they were going to dual it, and that was in the manifesto, and that was a commitment, and they just absolutely failed. The road's dangerous, there's lives being lost, The A96, just a disaster. So until we can get money out of central government, I mean, if we'd have stayed in Europe, presumably, if you go through Europe, they're spending money on roads and infrastructure and levelling up a lot better than the British government and the SNP have done. So I'm very, very doubtful that we'll achieve it unless something radical happens.
OK, let me hear from the man with the beard in the middle. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're getting the A9 dualled eventually at some point, whether it's going to be 2035 or not. What about the A96? Because we were promised that as well. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicola got into bed with the Greens, and one of the prices for that was to sort of scupper that, put it into our climate review. That seems to have been completely sort of forgotten about now as well. I think we're still waiting on some review to come back. That seems to be another broken promise.
Yeah, just for context, the Scottish Government have announced tonight, in fact, while we were gathering here, that a key climate change target to reduce car use by 20% is now not going to be met in the time frame that was established. Fergus Ewing, is this road, are you confident this road is going to be dual by 2035, the A9?
It should be. It should have been... we should have had far, far more progress. And indeed, this is why the gentlemen that's both spoken, it's why I cannot, despite having been in the SNP for 50 years and served the party for 26 years and have many friends, none of whom I want to let down, but I cannot defend the indefensible. And we have promised at every election since 2011 to dual both roads, and we have failed. I mean, it was General Wade who, in the 15-year period to 1740, built 250 miles of roads in the Highlands. And I don't think I could bring myself to say, bring back General Wade, because that wouldn't be very popular, since he was responsible for subjugating the Highlands.
Are you going to stand as an independent next year on this one topic to get it done?
Well, I have said that I'm sorely tempted to stand as an independent, and I'll make that decision later. I want to see if I might get any support, because that's always handy when you're standing for election.
Well, here's a good chance to find out tonight.
Well, indeed. But I only want my decision in due course. If I did, then I'm sure the SNP would throw the kitchen sink and perhaps even the camper van at to making sure that I didn't win. Can I just say that, you know, I fundamentally believe that most of the people in politics, both gentlemen here this evening, and most people in politics in the mainstream parties honestly want to serve the people of Scotland. I think we can work much better together in all the parties. I'm not suggesting a grand coalition, although I wouldn't rule that out. But the best period in the Scottish Parliament's short history was in 2007, when we worked closely all the time. I want to see that again.
Right, let's put that to the test. We've only got a minute left for each of the other panellists. Torcuil, okay. Is there a way to work together to get this done?
First of all, the A9 is a symbol of failure, the same as the ferries are a symbol of failure. You know, promising diamonds, delivering rust, empty promises time after time, which is what makes people disillusioned with politics and politicians. And the antidote, of course, is to be honest and be candid and have some candour and cooperation, as Fergus is suggesting. And yes, why shouldn't there be more cooperation? You get things, we're better together, we get things done together.
Edward Mountain?
I would absolutely work with anyone to get the A9 dual by 2035. I doubt it will be. It should be. Fergus and I sat on the same committee to look at why it wasn't dualled, and we both came up to say that the Scottish Government didn't commit themselves to it, and I think it's sad. I'll work together with anyone. I will not work together with the Greens, because I don't think it will end up with the A9 or the A96 being dualled, which I think is fundamental to the success of the Highlands.
Lesley, you're up and down that road all the time. Do you think it will be done by 2035, as is now promised?
No. But I'm up and down that road on all sorts of different transport, like I got here today on the train, and the train is single track. You know, it's not just, if you're going to kind of hammer the Greens, their preferred methods of travel, the cycle track is appalling. But the train particularly gets stuck all the time. Anybody from here will know. It just takes one little delay, you're stuck for a while, then other trains have to pass you because it's single tracks. You have to sit there for ages till they pass. The taxis come to connect you with all the outlying trains that you've missed. This has been going on for donkey's
It's about
years.
too much focus on the Central Belt.
It totally is. So, you know, that's the problem.
I agree with that.
And just the other little thing is, I'm old enough, along with other folk, to remember when Aberdeen also had a shonky road up the road from Dundee. Now, funnily enough, that got duelled. They've got oil.
Thank you. Lady in the very back row in the red. Yeah, on you go.
10 years is still a long time before the A9 will be duelled. Is there any way there can be some work done on some of the key junctions? Like, can you say Carbridge, Aviemore, Dalwhinnie? There's constantly accidents at these junctions, serious accidents. Can we not have some flashing warning lights as we approach the junctions, getting people to slow down? For 10 years, there'll be a lot of deaths and accidents on that road still to come, especially in the summer periods where you've got all the foreign drivers, all the rental cars. There's a high percentage of foreign drivers that are causing the accidents by taking the wrong lanes at the junctions.
Thank you. Lady in the glasses on the second row.
What you'll find there is you've got a very sensible woman speaking, just like the woman behind me when she was suggesting that we have a single parent running the country's finances. That's a really good solution. And I think one of the things about increasing our population up here is improving our roads, improving our public transport, making sure that our buses can run efficiently and our trains are better, because it is a great place to live. And I work at a school where the children are happy, they're outside, they're enjoying the environment, and we have a great thing up here. And yeah, let's get the money and let's spend it up here. Let's bring the renewable jobs up here. Let's get people working and learning, because we've got so much on our side. And I think that would increase our population.
How nice to end on a positive note. Thank you for that. That's it for tonight. We're back with you next week in Glasgow. Have a look at our website if you want to come along and join us for that. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated at 10:40 on BBC One Scotland, or you can watch it any time on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our brilliant audience in Inverness, and thanks to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week in Glasgow. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.